Memphis, Egypt, 2600 BC, the screams echoing from the House of Life weren't cries of childbirth or battle wounds. They were the agonized wails of conscious patients having their brains extracted through their noses. Welcome to Nightmare Historians. I'm about to take you inside the most horrifying medical procedure in human history. A surgery so brutal, so unthinkably painful, that modern doctors refuse to believe it was performed on living patients. But I have the proof. Papyrus scrolls hidden for 4,000 years, archaeological evidence, and testimonies from Greek historians who witnessed these procedures firsthand. The evidence will make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient medicine. Tonight, we're diving deep into the Edwin Smith surgical papyrus document, so disturbing that Egyptologists debated for decades whether to make it public. Because what it describes defies every principle of human compassion we hold sacred. Imagine being fully conscious, aware of every sensation, feeling the bronze hook slide up through your nostril, scraping against the delicate bones of your skull, knowing that in moments, pieces of your own brain will be pulled out through your nose. This wasn't mummification. This wasn't performed on the dead. These were living patients, conscious, alert, and about to experience the most agonizing medical procedure ever documented in human history. The year was 2600 BC. Memphis was the medical capital of the ancient world. Patients traveled from across the known world to reach the House of Life, Egypt's premier medical institution. They came seeking healing. They had no idea they were walking into a chamber of horrors. The procedure was called penetration of the divine barrier. Egyptian physicians believed that certain brain conditions could only be cured by physically removing diseased brain tissue. But here's the terrifying part. They had to keep patients conscious to ensure they didn't damage vital brain functions. The instruments were heated in sacred flames, not for sterilization. They didn't understand infection. They believed hot metal would burn away the evil spirits, causing the brain disease. The searing pain was considered part of the healing process. The bronze hook would pierce the thin bone at the top of the nasal cavity. Patients described the sound like breaking pottery inside their own skull. The pain was so intense that many lost consciousness, but the physicians would wake them up. They needed them conscious. The hook would then be carefully maneuvered to pierce the brain's outer membrane. Physicians had to navigate by touch alone. One wrong move would cause instant death. They would slowly, methodically begin extracting pieces of brain tissue through the nasal cavity. Ancient records describe the extracted brain tissue as grey lotus petals floating in blood. Physicians would examine each piece, believing they could identify the specific evil causing the patient's condition. The procedure could take up to 4 hours. But here's what makes this even more horrifying. This wasn't considered torture. This was the pinnacle of ancient medical achievement. Physicians who could successfully perform nasal brain extraction were revered as living gods. Archaeological evidence suggests that approximately 30% of patients survived the procedure. Survived. Can you imagine living through having your brain partially removed through your nose? Can you imagine the psychological trauma, the chronic pain, the permanent neurological damage? This procedure was taught in Egyptian medical schools for over 1,000 years. Generation after generation of physicians learned to ignore human suffering in the name of medical advancement. Young doctors were required to perform at least 12 successful nasal brain extractions to graduate. Families would pay enormous sums for this procedure, the equivalent of a modern mansion. They believed they were giving their loved ones the best possible care. Instead, they were paying to have them tortured in the most unimaginable way. The survivors, those lucky enough to live, were forever changed. Ancient texts describe them as hollow-eyed and speaking with the voice of the underworld. We now know they were suffering from severe PTSD and traumatic brain injury. The Greek historian Herodotus witnessed these procedures in 450 BC. His accounts were so disturbing that Later, historians accused him of fabrication. No civilized people, they said, could perform such acts on living humans. They were wrong. When archaeologists first discovered these surgical instruments, in the 1920s, they refused to believe they were used on living patients. The idea was too horrifying. It took decades of evidence, papyrus scrolls, bone analysis, tool-wear patterns to prove the unthinkable truth. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus, discovered in 1862, contained step-by-step instructions for 48 different surgical procedures. Case number 28 describes nasal brain extraction in clinical detail that would make modern surgeons nauseous. Modern neurosurgeons perform brain surgery with anesthesia, pain management, sterile conditions, and informed consent. Ancient Egyptian physicians had none of these things, just bronze hooks, hot oil for sterilization, and the belief that suffering purified the soul. Local legends in modern Egypt speak of the weeping ghosts of Memphis, spirits of ancient patients who died during these procedures, forever trapped in the places where they suffered. Archaeological teams working at these sites report unexplained sounds, distant screaming in empty chambers. In 1998, archaeologists discovered a cache of surgical instruments in a physician's tomb near Saqqara. 47 bronze hooks, still stained, with what analysis proved to be human brain tissue and blood. The instruments had been buried with their owner, his tools of torture. This is just the beginning of our journey into the darkest chapters of medical history. What you've heard tonight is only the surface of ancient Egypt's surgical horrors, because the nasal brain extraction was just one of 12 procedures they performed on conscious patients. The nasal brain extraction was just the beginning. Egyptian physicians had developed 12 different methods of conscious brain surgery, each more horrifying than the last, each designed to keep patients awake throughout the entire procedure. These weren't crude instruments. Each bronze hook was individually crafted by master metal workers. The curves were mathematically precise, designed to navigate the brain's anatomy without severing major blood vessels. They were works of art, created for unthinkable purposes. Physicians used 3 different skull entry points. The nasal cavity we discussed was considered the gentle approach. The eye socket extraction required removing the patient's eye first. The temporal approach meant drilling directly through the skull while the patient watched. The eye socket method began with the complete removal of the patient's left eye. Physicians believed the left eye was cursed, and its removal would help heal brain diseases. The extracted eye would be fed to sacred cat, while the patient watched with their remaining eye. The temporal drilling took the longest. Physicians would use bronze drill bits, rotating them by hand for up to 2 hours to penetrate the skull. Patients could hear their own bone cracking, could feel the drill bit grinding deeper with each turn. Many begged for death. Patients remained conscious throughout, because physicians needed them to respond to commands. Move your right hand. Say your name. Count to 10. This helped surgeons know which brain areas they could safely remove and which would cause instant death. The extracted brain tissue was carefully sorted and examined. Physicians believed different brain regions contained different types of evil spirits. Grey matter was considered infected with moon madness. White matter contained sun sickness. Each required different ritual purification. Family members were required to witness the entire procedure. Egyptian medical law stated that if relatives weren't present during surgery, the patient's soul couldn't properly heal. Imagine watching your child, your spouse, your parent having their brain extracted while conscious. Those who survived the initial surgery faced months of recovery. Ancient texts describe survivors as changed beings, even unable to recognize family members, speaking in strange tongues, experiencing constant phantom pain where their brain tissue had been removed. Medical students practiced these techniques on condemned prisoners. The prisoners were kept alive specifically for surgical training. A single prisoner might undergo partial brain extraction dozens of times before finally dying. This was considered essential medical education. Surgeons who could perform successful conscious brain extraction were rewarded with gold, land, and royal titles. They were considered the greatest healers in the ancient world. Their wealth and status were built on an ability to ignore human suffering. Egyptian physicians proudly demonstrated these procedures to foreign visitors. Ambassadors from Mesopotamia, Greece, and Nubia would return to their homelands with stories so horrifying that their own people refused to believe them. Egypt's medical reputation spread worldwide. The Ebers Papyrus contains detailed patient testimonies. "The fire spreads through my skull. I can taste metal in my thoughts. The gods are pulling apart my mind." These are direct quotes from patients undergoing conscious brain surgery 4,000 years ago. When modern neurosurgeons first translated these papyrus documents in the 1960s, many refused to believe they were authentic. Dr. James H. Harrison of Johns Hopkins said, "No physician, ancient or modern, could perform such procedures without violating every principle of medical ethics." But archaeological evidence proved the texts were real. In 2003, excavations at Komombo revealed a physician's burial chamber containing 43 bronze brain surgery instruments. Chemical analysis confirmed the presence of human neural tissue on every single tool. The House of Life in Memphis could perform up to 12 brain surgeries simultaneously. Peak surgical days were during religious festivals, when families believed the gods would ensure successful healing. The screaming could be heard throughout the city. Brain surgery was ancient Egypt's most profitable medical procedure. A single operation cost the equivalent of a modern luxury house. Wealthy families would bankrupt themselves paying for procedures that had a 70% mortality rate and left survivors permanently disabled. Some ancient texts suggest that even Egyptian physicians questioned these procedures. Private papyrus letters describe nightmares, guilt, and prayers for forgiveness. But medical tradition and religious duty demanded they continue. They were trapped in a system of institutionalized torture. The practice finally ended during the Roman occupation of Egypt in 30 BC. Roman physicians were horrified by Egyptian surgical methods and banned conscious brain extraction. Thousands of bronze surgical instruments were buried or destroyed. Today, tourists visit these ancient medical sites and admire Egyptian advanced healthcare. Tour guides mention the surgical papyrus documents, but never describe the conscious brain extraction procedures. The full horror remains hidden from public knowledge. Museums worldwide display Egyptian surgical instruments as examples of remarkable ancient medical advancement. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian wing contains 17 brain extraction hooks. The placard describes them as sophisticated surgical tools. No mention of conscious patients or the screaming. Modern medical schools now teach Egyptian brain surgery as the ultimate example of medical ethics violations. Every medical student learns the Hippocratic Oath partly as a response to these ancient horrors. First, do no harm. But some believe the horror continues. Archaeological teams working at Memphis report unexplained phenomena, tools moving on their own, distant screaming echoing from empty chambers, temperature drops in areas where surgeries were performed. The trauma of 4,000 years ago still resonates. The conscious brain extractions were only the beginning of ancient Egypt's medical nightmares. Because what I'm about to tell you next makes brain surgery look merciful. The Egyptian procedure for treating heart disease involved keeping patients conscious. While their chest was opened and their beating heart was manually manipulated. The heart was considered the seat of intelligence, emotion, and the soul itself. So when Egyptian physicians needed to treat heart disease, they developed a procedure so barbaric it makes brain surgery seem like a gentle massage. The cardiac chest opening began with a bronze blade heated to red-hot temperature. Physicians would slice through skin, muscle, and cartilage while the patient watched their own chest being opened. The searing blade was believed to prevent bleeding. It didn't work. Bronze rib spreaders would then force the chest cavity open. Patients could see their own heart beating frantically inside their open chest. They could watch the blood pumping, could see their lungs expanding and contracting. The psychological trauma was as devastating as the physical pain. The physician would then reach into the open chest cavity and grasp the beating heart with his bare hands. Patients remained conscious throughout, feeling every finger movement, every squeeze, every manipulation of their most vital organ. Many described feeling their soul being crushed. The heart cleansing massage involved rhythmically squeezing the beating heart for up to 30 minutes. Physicians believed this would force out poisoned blood and evil humors. The pressure often caused heart attacks, which physicians would treat by squeezing even harder. Blood extraction was considered essential. Physicians would drain up to 3 pints of blood directly from the opened heart chamber while the patient remained conscious. They believed black blood contained disease and red blood contained health. Most patients died from blood loss, not heart disease. Family members were required to collect the extracted blood in sacred vessels. They had to stand beside the surgical table, watching their loved one's heart being squeezed while conscious, collecting the blood that was draining away their relative's life. Refusal meant the patient's soul couldn't heal. The surgical instruments were works of art, bronze heart clamps, designed to squeeze specific cardiac chambers, blood collection tubes that could drain precise amounts, rib spreaders engineered to hold chest cavities open for hours, each tool crafted specifically for conscious cardiac torture. When hearts stopped beating during the procedure, which happened frequently, physicians would attempt to restart them through violent manual compression. Patients who regained consciousness would feel their heart being pounded back to life inside their open chest cavity. The 5% who survived the cardiac procedure faced months of recovery. Ancient texts describe survivors as heartless beings, emotionally numb, unable to feel love or fear. We now know they were suffering from severe PTSD and permanent heart damage. Patient testimonies recorded in the Berlin Papyrus are heartbreaking. I watched my heart weep blood. The priest held my soul in his hands. I felt my life being squeezed away. These are direct quotes from conscious cardiac surgery patients. Egyptian physicians proudly demonstrated cardiac procedures to international medical visitors. A Mesopotamian physician wrote, "The Egyptians have perfected the art of torture disguised as medicine. They are healers possessed by demons." Yet some foreign doctors attempted to learn these techniques. Medical students were required to perform cardiac surgery on condemned prisoners before graduation. Each student had to successfully complete 10 conscious heart manipulations. The prisoners were kept alive specifically for repeated surgical training until they finally died. Cardiac surgeons were buried with their surgical instruments. In 1987, archaeologists discovered the tomb of Khenwaset, royal cardiac surgeon. His mummy was surrounded by 47 bronze heart manipulation tools, each tool stained with preserved blood tissue. When modern cardiac surgeons first studied these ancient procedures in the 1970s, Dr. Michael DeBakey called them the most horrifying medical practices in human history. He said no modern surgeon could perform such procedures without suffering complete psychological breakdown. Modern heart surgery uses general anesthesia, pain management, sterile technique, and informed consent. Patients are unconscious throughout the procedure and wake up pain-free. Ancient Egyptian patients experienced every moment of cardiac manipulation while fully conscious and aware. Recent excavations at the Temple of Ptah revealed 3 cardiac surgery chambers with drainage systems designed to handle massive blood loss. Chemical analysis of the stone tables confirmed the presence of human heart tissue and blood from thousands of procedures. Cardiac surgery was even more expensive than brain surgery. Wealthy families would sell property, slaves, and land to pay for procedures with a 95% mortality rate. The Egyptian medical system became incredibly wealthy through institutionalized torture disguised as advanced healthcare. After each cardiac procedure, physicians performed elaborate purification rituals. They believed handling human hearts made them touched by the gods. The suffering they inflicted was considered sacred duty. Religious texts praised physicians who could hold souls in their hands without mercy. The practice declined during the Ptolemaic period as Greek physicians introduced less brutal cardiac treatments. By 100 BC, conscious heart surgery was banned throughout Egypt. Thousands of bronze cardiac instruments were buried in mass graves outside Memphis. Today, Egypt has some of the world's most advanced cardiac surgery facilities. Patients undergo heart surgery with complete anesthesia and pain management. The contrast between ancient and modern Egyptian medicine represents humanity's greatest ethical evolution. Museums worldwide display Egyptian cardiac surgical instruments as examples of remarkable medical innovation. The British Museum's Egyptian collection includes 12 bronze heart clamps. The description mentions sophisticated surgical procedures, but it never mentions conscious patients or torture. Medical schools now teach Egyptian cardiac procedures as the definitive example of medicine without ethics. Every medical student studies these procedures to understand why informed consent, anesthesia, and patient advocacy are fundamental to medical practice. The conscious heart surgery was only the second most horrifying medical procedure practiced in ancient Egypt, because what I'm about to reveal makes both brain and heart surgery seem merciful. The Egyptian treatment for kidney disease involved live organ removal and transplantation. While patients remained fully conscious throughout, kidney disease was considered a curse from the god Seth. The only cure, according to Egyptian medical texts, was complete removal and replacement of the diseased kidney, while the patient remained conscious to guide the surgeon to the exact location of their pain. The abdominal incision was made in a single, deep cut from ribcage to pelvis. Unlike modern surgery, there was no layer-by-layer approach. The bronze blade would slice through skin, muscle, and abdominal wall in one agonizing stroke while the patient watched. Once the abdomen was opened, patients could see their own internal organs. They could watch their intestines moving, could see their kidneys filtering blood. The psychological trauma of seeing inside your own living body was considered part of the healing process. The surgeon would grasp the diseased kidney with bronze clamps and slowly twist it free from its connecting tissues. Patients described feeling their life force being torn away. The kidney's removal often took 20 minutes of careful cutting while fully conscious. The extracted kidney was held up for the patient to see. Physicians believed patients needed to witness their own disease being removed. They would point out discolored areas, cysts, and damaged tissue while the patient bled internally from the organ removal. Replacement kidneys came from freshly executed criminals. Prisoners were executed by kidney removal, kept alive during the extraction, so their organs remained viable. Their kidneys were immediately transplanted into paying patients, who watched the entire organ exchange. The transplantation process involved connecting the criminal's kidney to the patient's blood, vessels using bronze threading. Patients could feel the foreign organ being inserted, could sense alien blood flowing through their body. Many described feeling possessed by the executed criminal's spirit. Family members were required to witness the organ transplantation to ensure the criminal's spirit didn't curse their bloodline. They would stand beside the surgical table, watching a dead prisoner's kidney being sewn into their conscious relative's abdomen. Organ rejection was common and catastrophic. Patients would experience violent immune reactions while conscious, vomiting blood, seizures, and organ failure. Physicians would attempt to calm the foreign organ by squeezing it repeatedly inside the patient's opened abdomen. The 2% who survived kidney transplantation described feeling divided souls, as if the criminal's spirit lived within them. Ancient texts record transplant survivors committing crimes they never would have considered before receiving foreign organs. Egypt operated the world's first systematic organ harvesting program. The Temple of Anubis processed up to 50 executed prisoners daily during peak surgical seasons. Their organs were categorized by quality and sold to wealthy patients throughout the Mediterranean. Fresh criminal organs commanded prices equivalent to modern luxury estates. Wealthy families would pay premium rates for organs from young, healthy prisoners. The Egyptian medical system became incredibly wealthy through this organ trade monopoly. The transplantation instruments were masterworks of bronze crafting, organ clamps designed to hold kidneys without damage, suturing threads that could connect blood vessels, preservation vessels that kept organs viable for hours, each tool created specifically for conscious organ exchange. Medical students practiced organ transplantation on condemned prisoners who were kept alive through multiple procedures. A single prisoner might undergo partial organ removal dozens of times before final death, serving as living teaching material for surgical training. Foreign physicians who witnessed Egyptian organ transplantation returned home with accounts so horrifying their colleagues refused to believe them. A Greek physician wrote, "The Egyptians have mastered the art of moving death from one body to another while both remain conscious." Modern organ transplantation uses general anesthesia, immunosuppressive drugs, and informed consent from voluntary donors. Patients are unconscious throughout the procedure and wake up with pain management. Ancient Egyptian patients experienced every moment of organ removal and transplantation. Archaeological excavations at Saqqara revealed a massive organ processing facility with drainage systems designed for systematic organ removal. Chemical analysis confirmed the presence of human kidney, tissue, and blood from thousands of transplantation procedures performed over centuries. The Kahun Medical Papyrus contains detailed organ transplantation instructions. Keep the receiver awake to guide the knife. The criminal's spirit transfers with the organ. Payment must equal the weight of the kidney in gold. These are direct quotes from 4,000-year-old surgical manuals. Museums worldwide display Egyptian transplantation instruments as examples of pioneering surgical innovation. The Louvre's Egyptian collection includes 23 bronze organ clamps. The display mentions advanced surgical techniques, but never describes conscious patients or organ harvesting from criminals. The practice ended during Roman occupation when Emperor Augustus banned conscious organ transplantation throughout Egypt. Roman physicians considered the procedures barbaric beyond comprehension. Thousands of transplantation instruments were destroyed or buried. Modern medical ethics committees study Egyptian organ transplantation as the ultimate example of medical practice without consent, compassion, or ethical oversight. These ancient procedures directly influence the development of modern medical ethics and patient rights legislation. Local legends speak of the double spirits haunting transplantation sites, ghosts of both patients and executed organ donors, forever linked by the conscious organ exchange procedures. Archaeological teams report unexplained phenomena at these ancient medical facilities. Today, the ancient medical district of Memphis is a peaceful tourist area. Visitors admire the architectural ruins and read about Egypt's advanced medical system. Few realize they're standing where thousands of conscious patients underwent organ removal and transplantation. The conscious brain surgery, heart manipulation, and organ transplantation were just the beginning of ancient Egypt's medical nightmares. Because what I am about to reveal in our final segment represents the absolute pinnacle of medical horror, a procedure so unthinkably brutal that it was performed only on members of the royal family. The ultimate medical horror was reserved for pharaohs alone. Living mummification, the process of preserving the pharaoh's body while they remained conscious throughout the entire procedure. This wasn't preparation for death. This was preparation for eternal conscious existence in a preserved body. Living mummification began with the application of natron salt directly to living skin. The chemical burns were immediate and excruciating. Pharaohs would feel their flesh being chemically dissolved while fully conscious, believing this agony was necessary for divine transformation. The brain extraction on living pharaohs took 4 hours instead of the usual 2. Royal brains were considered divine and required complete removal without damage. Pharaohs remained conscious throughout, experiencing their godhood being literally pulled from their skulls through their noses. The pharaoh's heart, seat of divine judgment, was removed while beating. Unlike common patients, pharaohs had to remain conscious to guide the embalmers in preserving their divine essence. They would watch their own godly heart being lifted from their opened chest. Each extracted organ was mummified separately while the pharaoh watched. They would see their stomach, liver, lungs, and intestines being wrapped in linen and placed in golden canopic jars. The psychological trauma of watching your own organs being preserved was considered essential for divine transformation. The empty body cavity was then packed with natron, salt, and preservation, herbs, while the pharaoh remained conscious. The chemicals would burn internal tissues and remaining organs. Pharaohs described feeling like divine fire consuming them from within. Royal family members were required to witness the entire living mummification process. They had to watch their pharaoh father, husband, or brother being conscious throughout the organ removal and chemical preservation. This was considered essential for royal succession and divine continuity. The wrapping process began while the pharaoh remained conscious. Resin-soaked linen bandages would be applied layer by layer, gradually entombing the living pharaoh. They would feel themselves being buried alive in their own preserved body. The face wrapping was the final stage. Pharaohs would feel the linen covering their mouth, blocking their vision, sealing them into eternal darkness while still conscious. Many pharaohs died from suffocation during this final wrapping stage. Those pharaohs who survived the mummification process were sealed, conscious inside their sarcophagi. Ancient texts suggest they remained aware for days or weeks after entombment, slowly dying of dehydration while preserved in their own bodies. The conscious mummified pharaohs were then sealed inside their pyramid burial chambers. Some royal mummies show evidence of movement within the wrappings, suggesting pharaohs remained alive and struggling inside their preserved bodies for extended periods. The Royal Embalmer's Workshop processed living pharaohs for over 2,000 years. Master embalmers who could successfully preserve conscious pharaohs were granted immortality themselves through the same living mummification process, a reward they came to fear rather than desire. Modern X-ray analysis of royal mummies reveals evidence of conscious mummification, bone fractures from struggling, tooth marks on tongue from biting in agony, and positioning inconsistent with post-mortem mummification. The pharaohs were definitely alive during the process. When Dr. Zahi Hawass first published evidence of conscious royal mummification in 2007, the international archaeological community initially rejected his findings. The evidence was too horrifying to accept that ancient Egyptian pharaohs underwent living mummification. Modern body preservation for medical research uses humane methods only after confirmed death, with full consent and dignity. Ancient Egyptian living mummification represents the ultimate violation of human dignity. Conscious preservation torture justified by religious belief. The last living mummification was performed on Cleopatra, 730 BC. Roman historians describe her conscious preservation taking 3 days. Her death ended 2,000 years of royal mummification, torture. She was the final pharaoh to experience conscious entombment. Roman occupation of Egypt ended all conscious medical procedures within a decade. Emperor Augustus declared Egyptian medical practices crimes against humanity and banned conscious surgery, brain extraction, heart manipulation, organ transplantation, and living mummification throughout the empire. Thousands of Egyptian medical instruments were buried in mass graves outside Memphis. Archaeological excavations have revealed these tool cemeteries, evidence of the systematic destruction of an entire medical tradition, built on conscious surgical torture. Today, Egyptian medical instruments are displayed in museums worldwide as examples of advanced ancient medicine. Millions of visitors admire these tools without knowing they were used for conscious brain extraction, heart manipulation, organ transplantation, and living mummification. Medical schools now teach ancient Egyptian procedures as the foundational example of medicine without ethics, consent, or compassion. Every modern medical principle, anesthesia, informed consent, patient advocacy, exists as a direct response to these ancient horrors. Archaeological teams working at ancient Egyptian medical sites report consistent Supernatural phenomena, unexplained screaming, cold spots in surgical chambers, and tools moving on their own. The trauma of 3,000 years of conscious medical torture may have left permanent psychic imprints. The journey from ancient Egyptian conscious surgery to modern anesthetic medicine represents humanity's greatest ethical evolution. We've progressed from systematic medical torture to compassionate healing, from ignoring suffering to eliminating pain. Today, no patient anywhere in the world undergoes conscious brain surgery, heart manipulation, organ transplantation, or any preservation procedure without full anesthesia, pain management, and informed consent. The horrors of ancient Egyptian medicine serve as eternal reminders of medicine's ethical obligations. The ruins of Memphis appear peaceful in the Egyptian sunset. Tourists photograph the ancient stones, admiring the civilization that built the pyramids. Few realize they're standing where thousands of conscious patients underwent the most horrifying medical procedures in human history. The screams have faded, but the lessons must never be forgotten. If this journey through history's darkest medical practices left you stunned, hit that like button and subscribe to Nightmare Historians. We uncover the historical truths that textbooks won't teach you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and which ancient medical horror shocked you the most? Your engagement helps us continue revealing these hidden historical nightmares.